Hello. I was thinking today that if I'm going to really be effective at helping others see what DBT has to offer, then that means I'm probably going to have to offer up a little bit of information about myself. So, that's kind of what I'm going to do. Kind of give you a little overview as to who I am and what I'm about, and some of the things that kind of have brought me to where I am today. Well, first of all, I am 37 years old, and I have three children. I have a daughter, Robin, who is 12 years old, a son, Joshua, who will be 9, and a 2.5-year-old son, Timothy. I grew up in your typical family, mother, father. I had two older brothers and a younger sister. My dad was in the military, so for a lot of the early years of my life, we traveled. Then my mom decided that the traveling kind of had to stop for the younger kids, that it was more important for us to stay stable and have a structure. So while my brothers and my dad went back to Germany, which is where I was born, my mom, sister, and I stayed in the United States and lived with my grandmother. There have been a lot of issues that I have struggled through and overcome as a child. Of course, many of which led to my inability to regulate my emotions when I get stressed. It led to the borderline personality disorder, which I had mentioned before briefly that a lot of people with BPD have traits where they have a lot of poor self-image and self-destructive and self-injurious behavior, impulsivity, just a lot of times just has a huge inability to regulate painful and stressful emotions, and tends to make decisions impulsively as opposed to thinking it through. When I was younger, there were several people involved in it, but I had been abused by several boys in my class when I was younger. And a lot of that abuse happened on the bus long before they ever had cameras. And a lot of it kind of even spilled over into school life. Because I moved around a lot, and because I was also a very sick child. I had a lot of severe ear infections that kept me in the hospital a lot of the time. So I wasn't really able to solidify a lot of my childhood relationships with the people that I went to school with. So that kind of made me a target. I underwent a lot of bullying, and we're not just talking, being teased. I mean, downright physical violence against me. And when I got to middle school, the physical violence changed into kind of like social suicide, basically. There were a lot of vicious rumors that were going around about my sexual orientation, which were not true, but it made my life really difficult. And I didn't talk a lot about what was going on with my mom. She had a lot on her plate trying to take care of me and my sister, and we were also living with my grandmother for about 1.5 years or so until my dad and brothers came back. So there were a lot of issues and a lot of extenuating circumstances when I was in elementary and middle school that really gave me an inadequate ability to handle situations. Now, I had been taught over and over about what to do if somebody made me uncomfortable, or if somebody did something to me that was inappropriate. But it's just, I was constantly in the limelight because I was sick and because I was missing school, and I was just different than other people, and I was not about to add one more deficiency to that long list. So I kept it all to myself, and that is kind of how my addiction to cutting started. Now, in the younger ages, I wasn't using like knives or anything. I was pretty much hurting myself with anything I could find. I would super glue my fingers together and then pull them apart and pull the skin off. I would use safety pins in my hands and pull the skin off and leave my hands raw. I would use erasers on my arms and pull the skin off. I even started scratching myself repeatedly in the same place over and over and over again until it was raw. And sometimes some of those things became automatic, where sometimes I didn't even realize I did it until it was over. And I kind of disassociated from the situation because it kind of helped me escape and it kind of helped me deal. But I started these behaviors early on. My parents noticed, or at least my mom did, because my dad really wasn't available at the time. But, and they did what they could to alleviate some of this, but it was still difficult. And I guess they were kind of hoping that a lot of this would just kind of pass over, or something I would grow out of. And things seemed to settle down a little bit. I was your typical high school kid, even though I was still fairly depressed. It wasn't something that I talked about a lot. I did my schoolwork, I did what I could, and, I just kind of coasted through life. I didn't have a lot of friends, or at least none that I really considered to be extremely close. It never really kind of worked out. I was constantly being hurt and rejected by people, so I wasn't about to put myself out there. And then my senior year, I wanted to enjoy the last year of high school. I didn't know what life had in store for me. I didn't know, where I was really, what I was going to do yet. So I decided that I was really going to enjoy it. So I threw myself into show choir, which I had already been a part of, but I was really involved in it this year. And I got my first real boyfriend. He was in show choir, and he was so smart and so funny. And he was, at the time, he was just kind of what I needed. And I really attribute a lot to the fact that I made it through high school, through my senior year, to this person. But the hardest part, though, was I began noticing a lot of changes in my attitude, and I was becoming a lot more depressed a lot more often. I was journaling a lot, and I needed somebody to talk to. I needed to vent. I needed to be able to get out these emotions that I was hiding for so long. And I had talked to someone that I normally didn't confide in, but it wasn't because I didn't necessarily trust her. It was just, it's just not something that I did. So I talked to her. She went home and talked to her mom about what I had talked to her about, and somehow it ended up, making its way around, and then pretty much my life began to explode. Everybody was finding out about this, and they didn't quite know how to react because, the year was 1997, so it's not something that really happened a lot. You didn't hear a lot about students who had mental illness and stuff like that, so it was really still kind of taboo. But I just kind of ignored it and hoped that it would go away eventually. And then everything kind of came to a head on senior awards night. And we were allowed to choose who we sat beside for graduation. And they just, handed out the diplomas based on how we signed our names. So I was sitting next to my boyfriend at the time, and it became very, very clear that, I just kind of coasted through my high school career and really didn't make any effort to get anything out of it. So as I was watching my other classmates go up and accept their awards, and my boyfriend accepting award after award after award, told you he was really smart. It just kind of put the final nail in my coffin, so to speak. I really began to doubt my worth, and I really began to doubt that I was really meant to do anything. It seemed like a lot of the things that I had been told as a child by people in authority over me that I wasn't worth anything. Jesus couldn't love somebody like me, and that I was going to wind up living alone and destitute, and that was just my destiny. And at that time, I was really beginning to believe it, especially after watching, all these people going up and receiving these accolades for their work in high school. And here I was getting absolutely nothing, as if I was kind of invisible. I went home that night, and I sat in my room, and I thought, and I thought, and I thought. Now, the only people who were home at the time were me, my younger sister, and my dad. And the more I thought about it, the more I decided that my time had come. My life was about to end. So, in a final conversation, I called my boyfriend at the time, and basically I was calling to say goodbye. And I couldn't leave the world without telling him goodbye. So I called and I talked to him, and he realized something was off, and he continued to talk to me, and he was very supportive and very comforting, letting me know that he cared for me and whatnot. But I kind of had enough, and I was ready to go. So even while we were talking, my decision was final, that my life had to end. And while he was on the phone with me, I actually, this was the first real attempt that I had at trying to commit suicide. And he realized what was going on. Now, mind you, I didn't know that he realized what was going on. And he was able to get a message to his parents, and they called 911. And all of a sudden, I look out the window, and there are 8 state troopers on my front lawn at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, and mind you, we're talking rural West Virginia, so everybody and their mother has a police scanner, so, which I didn't think about at the time. But when they got there, I came out and met them. I didn't want them knocking on the door and waking up my sister and my dad. I was determined to take care of the situation. So I took my dog outside, and I talked to the police officers, explained everything was fine, nothing's going on, everything had been taken care of. It was a big misunderstanding, and eventually they left. And big sigh of relief. I really didn't think I was going to get away with it. So, but the next day, because as a senior, I didn't have to go to school the next day. So I got to sleep in, kind of chill out. Well, I get a rude awakening. My sister gets home and she is like, "What happened?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Everybody heard on the scanner that there were cops here," and it's just like everything was just going wrong. Everything was becoming overwhelming and chaotic, and I finally was able to convince her that everything was fine and, we're all good. And I made the worst decision of my life. Instead of giving my parents the benefit of the doubt, and instead of believing that they could help me, I really believed that it was better for them if I left. Because apparently, I failed at trying to kill myself. So I didn't want to be a burden on them any longer. So I contacted my boyfriend at the time and explained what was going on and that I needed to get away, but I needed to make sure that I was safe and whatnot. So I packed up a bag and I left. And that, I say, was the worst decision of my life, and it's because kids never see what help their parents can be. Kids never give their parents the opportunity to do their job. And I'm really seeing that now with a 12-year-old in my house. So, that decision kind of started a whole new journey for me. I eventually ended up moving back in with my parents, but my mom noticed that I really needed some extra support and some extra help. So we admitted me into a behavioral health center, and I was there for 2 weeks. But that is where they finally diagnosed me with bipolar and borderline personality disorder. So back then I didn't have DBT. Back then I didn't have skills. Back then I didn't have much of anything to help regulate my emotions, to help me through the overwhelming wave of things that were happening in my life at the time. And I was so impulsive, and I was so quick to make decisions without thinking things through. And it's very dysfunctional, and it's just not effective anymore. And even at 37, I still struggle with making impulsive decisions. But now, because of DBT, I have the skills necessary to pull out when I need them. And I use them and I practice them daily, and they help, and they have changed my life. They've changed how I communicate with my kids, and how I communicate with my husband, and even how I communicate with my friends and family, which can always be really stressful depending on the situation. So that's just kind of like a little bit of background on me. There are a lot more details that I can kind of go into, but that's just kind of the beginning of the story right there. So when I tell you I've been there, when I tell you that I understand the depression, and I understand the mania, and I understand the compulsion to be destructive and self-injurious, I've been there, I've done it. And you don't have to doubt my sincerity. I am here to support and help in any way that I can. And feel free to contact me through Facebook or make comments or whatever. I will happily answer any questions you have for me. But just know that you're not alone, and that there are people out there who've been there and who are ready and willing to help you in any way possible.